So somebody had a question for me about gestures, and so I wrote myself a bunch of notes. Uh, Obviously, you can't read them, so I'll read them out. So gesture is, I'm going to just say gesture's choreography. So choreography would be like, let's take fight choreography. You know, you want to watch a movie like, John Wick, and they do all that really cool action stuff, and they have to plan like all the stunts out. They have to plan out all the, who's going to shoot who and from what direction and where they're going to, where's he going to draw a weapon from, and if he's going to shoot the other guy, where's he going to stand? And there's a lot of this kind of pre-planning that's necessary. A lot of it's an executive skill, right? And planning is where you have to unpack all the things you got to do. You're trying to get everything down to the smallest actionable detail, so you know exactly. It's like if you're going to go and buy milk, right? Well, buying milk involves a bunch of things. First, you got to make sure you're properly dressed. You got to make sure you got some money on you. You got to have your wallet. You got to go downstairs, put on your shoes, tie your shoelaces, and then you're gonna have to bring your keys with you, right? Like this is just breaking down all the individual little steps necessary to get the job done. So that's what planning is about. And the reason why you need to plan things is really it's about knowing and figuring out everything that you've signed up for, right? Like knowing what you signed up for, because oftentimes what happens is people set out to say, all right, I'm gonna draw like a big mural, I'm gonna draw like a comic book, I'm gonna draw like this big old illustration, and then they run into problems because they don't know exactly what they signed up for. They run into problems that are outside of the scope of what they planned for, and they've got no plan for what to do. And so that tends to be, I think running into unexpected issues tends to be a bit of a motivation killer. So that's why planning is really important. And also, it's like this is also like doing gesture is a stage of pre-visualization. So visualization in of itself would just be where you're drawing, you're visualizing the thing, you're drawing everything with the color and the inks and you're making everything look final finish, right? Like that's the final visualization of the idea. But even before that, we do a little bit of pre-visualization, stuff that never sees the light of day, stuff that we never post on Instagram to show how perfect and awesome we are and how we never plan any of this stuff out, and it just magically comes out of our pen. So we have this thing called pre-visualization, which is all the stuff that goes on, in the backstage. And so you're going to be planning this stuff. It's a pre-visualization stage, which never sees the light of day, but it's something that you do so that when you actually sit down to do a visualization, when you sit down to do an illustration, that you don't run into those. Well, we work out the problems we're going to run into. And the thing is that because you've pre-visualized it, because you make kind of a few simple diagrams, you can actually see the thing in front of you, and you're like, oh, I don't like the way this thing looks. That thing's not quite happening the way I planned in my head, right? Pre-visualization means that you're going to be drawing it in some rudimentary form on the page just so you can see the thing, and some problems are going to present themselves, and you can toss out some of those ideas, and you can make changes before you invest too much effort into coloring and inking the thing and making nice tight line work and all that. So right. So the thing about gesture is also that there's no anatomy. Like you can completely ignore drawing any anatomy of the thing unless the anatomy is participating. So it means unless somebody is actually like there's very little detail unless you actually have participation occurring. So participation would be like if you grab somebody by the shirt collar. Well, you're going to have to draw that hand with all the fingers. I don't know, maybe with the fingers, maybe not. Maybe you draw it as a mitten, right? But you do draw, the shirt collar that is being grabbed, right? Those are the participants, right? That's the participating, those are the participating elements, the things, the participating things, the elements. So if there is something that is important to the narrative that you're trying to get across with your gesture, if somebody's, throwing a if it's a magician and he's throwing a fireball, right? Well, then it would probably be good to have maybe the target that is the target of the fireball. It would be good to show the hand that's casting the fireball and perhaps the fireball that's actually flying out. Those are important details. Those are participants of the gesture. And so when I speak of gesture, I'm speaking of this in terms of like production work. All right. And so, okay, like look here, I'm going to just show you like my notes. You can probably see here, this is like a gesture for throwing a fireball, right? Is that we might have a target. We're going to have to throw a fireball at this guy's head. I just literally just drew his head. And the thing is that there's no anatomy, right? And there's no perspective either. It's entirely drawn just from the side view. And the anatomy, like I'm not even worrying about things like, you know, exactly where the elbow break is, where the shoulder break is. This is just to figure out, you know, I'm just trying to figure out a clear action. I'm trying to communicate. You know, you can see that his weight is obviously, you know, on the forward, but he doesn't even completely fit on the page, right? But I got a pretty good feel for like how that it really looks like he's throwing something, right? So the first thing I would draw is the target, and you know, I'll draw like the guy from the side because, you know, perspective is another wrinkle. It's another thing you have to deal with, and I just say, you know what, make your job easier. Like the thing is that because this stuff is all occurring backstage, nobody's going to see this stuff. You can actually break this big problem. The big problem is trying to draw all these things with all these details in the correct perspective, and everything that you need, you know, it's like that's just too many things at once. All right, I'm not that brilliant. I'm not like I'm a mere mortal. Okay, I can't do all that stuff at once. So what I do, break it into multiple tasks. So I'll draw him without perspective, without anatomy. I'll just draw him really, really, you know, simply, maybe with some very rudimentary basic proportion. And I call this style of gesture or type of gesturing or usage of gesturing, I'm going to call it diagrammatic gesturing. It's a diagram. It's a diagram of what's going on. It means that any numbnut can look at this thing and understand the action of what is going on. Like that's the thing, is it's not the final thing. It's just the decision of the action of what's going on. And then I can redo this gesture like this in perspective, right? This perspective gesture, I'm going to call this compositional gesture. So I will draw the target, and I just redrew him from a different angle. And let me tell you, it's a lot easier to when you have the diagram gesture from like the side view, it's so much easier after you've done that to refer to that and use that for drawing something in perspective. Right. And now it's like, even from perspective, it's like I can draw, like literally it becomes a comic panel. it's that much easier. And this is now the compositional gesture. And then when it's actually time to sit down in front of the nice professional drawing software, it's like, oh well, that now I can. Oops, sorry. There we are. Right. So, you know, now that I'm over here in front of the professional drawing software, I can actually go and I can draw that panel out, and I can just redraw. You know, well, I guess I want to have the guy's face here. So I want his, and the thing is, like, his face is just like a silhouette, you know, because we're seeing him from behind. So maybe I can draw him like this. And the thing is that, again, this is probably not going to be the comic panel. This is also known as, like, in Japanese terms, they call it the name, or name, perhaps. It's like the storyboard, right? It's like the rougher version of it. So, okay, so this guy's going to get hit in the face. I'm just going to draw the impact, just get that scene. Okay, and then I want the other guy who's throwing that fireball. I want that fireball to occur over here. And maybe I want to have his face, you know, somewhere back here. Maybe I want to make the hand a little larger, right? And see, this is the other thing, right? Is that, like, all this stuff, I didn't do any warm-ups today, so I'm going to be kind of crappy right now. And I got to figure out, oh, well, let's see. How should that hand, you know, for casting a fireball be, right? Should it be something like, you know, should he be doing some kind of rocker gesture, right, when he casts a fireball? Yeah, there we are, right? So this is another thing, right? Using the margins, you can use the margins of your page for, like, okay, so now that we actually have that, right? Maybe what happens is the fireball kind of manifests itself between his fingertips. It goes, and we have sort of an arc forming, and the fireball, emits like that. So he actually has to aim. So, okay, all right. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to knock this back. And maybe what I want to do is we're going to reduce. And this is the other thing, right? It's like, yeah, I know that this panel is like a really tall panel, which makes it a little bit troublesome and tricky to deal with. Maybe this is kind of thing that would work better on a widescreen panel, but I'm like, no. Okay, let's just say this is all we have left to work with. So I'm purposely raising the difficulty of this like up a notch. In fact, we might not even show the impact. We might simply show the person casting. So I'm just going to take his fingers, right? So that I'm boxing this, right? I'm just taking that and I'm throwing it in a big box like that. I'm just going to box that off. And again, until like you shouldn't try to make everything look super clean and detailed too early, right? If you're still a little bit muddy, if your concept is still kind of muddy, as mine is right now, I would say just don't try to draw something clean. Just it's okay to make something kind of crappy to begin with. Low investment drawing. Even like where that head is, right? It's like, I'm probably gonna wind up moving that. And yeah, okay, so and the thing is that I've been doing so much programming, so I'm so freaking rusty right now. It's hilarious. So I hope that people who are like really worried about whether or not their art skills are good enough, I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Just do it anyway. Yeah, your art skills aren't good enough. Fine. Then just do it anyway. Don't let that stop you from drawing. I'm not on Instagram right now. I don't have to be perfect. And this stage, right? Because it's all low investment, we can start shoving things around. We can start being really, really crappy and just slice things up. I kind of don't like how this is looking a little fly swatted. I want this to be a little bit more towards us. So I'm going to just take that, knock that back. I'm going to knock it back a lot. I want something a bit more. And maybe that's another thing, right? It's like before you even do your comic panels. That's the other thing, right? It's like I just realized it's like, yeah, man, I'm going to bail on this because trying to do it like choosing the comic panel size before you've even figured out the perspective is a little rough, man. It's too much for me to handle. So you know what? Screw it. I'm going to bail on it. Like learn when to cut your losses. This is why we do pre-visualization. This is why we don't get overly invested in something. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm liking the look of that. This is our silly hand gesture. And maybe even this way, like let's take that, shrink that down. All right, I'm trying to be a little bit permissive here, right? And by permissive, I mean, stop trying to be the person who like does everything perfectly with no mistakes whatsoever, and it's like, oh, there's no erasing allowed, and blah blah. I'm like, no, let's stop being that kind of person. We're gonna cheat, all right? Yes, there's some cheating. Yes, there's some shortcuts being taken in terms of how we're erasing and moving things around. But you know what? It's like I think this is still better than saying, all right, well, I'm just gonna use I'm just going to use like CSP and have that thing do some 3D, give me a 3D posable model, and then I'm just going to trace it, right? Because I think this is one of the problems. Well, I don't know what I call it a problem, but I say this seems to be the way that people do things now. Is they seem to they there's a lot of like mass produced manga and comics that are being made with like just tracing, and this is kind of cool. It's like this in this case, the character is really just like they're not even throwing all their might into it, right? They're just kind of, pew. So, you know, you can do something like that, right? This is like so I guess this is like for somebody who's such a pro, he doesn't even have to like really pose into it. For him, it's like really easy to cast it. This is why we do pre-visualization, right? It's to work out all these different ways to throw the fireball out now. Right? Maybe I can, again, we'll do this from the side and we'll start figuring out. It's kind of funny is at the moment that I figured that he was going to do that kind of that funny hand gesture, it changed everything about the way the pose was going to be. And because I never drew the other side of his body, how about maybe we do something like this? Right. So I think this, like okay. So what's kind of important now is that knowing how your character actually throws the fireball is kind of important, right? Is the fireball simply being emitted from mana that channels between his fingertips and then it coalesces between his fingertips and is launched that way? Or is it more like a hand grenade or a stone that he throws? Is it like, how is this fireball actually coming out? And the reason why that's important to know is because if you were to, let's say, animate this, you know, for like a movie or something like that, or a cartoon, you know, somebody's going to have to do that action. And so, you know, knowing how the fireball is manifested and targeted and thrown will greatly change the pose. It will greatly change the action, and it opens up a lot of possibilities. And so this planning and pre-visualization exists to narrow down those possibilities, because the rough drawing is not just rough, it's loose. Things haven't been nailed down. It's very approximate. It's very vague. It means that things are still open to interpretation, open to change. It's low investment. You know, it's okay for us to toss out something that is low investment, and we can be a lot more. We can afford to be a lot more, you know, creative and flighty, and we can be fickle. We're allowed to be fickle, right? It means that we're allowed to be very whimsical. We can change things as we see fit right now, because we haven't fully decided exactly what we want right now. And I think, you know, sometimes just not having your mind made up 100% from the beginning, while that sounds, there's two ways to look at that. One way to look at it is it's very indecisive. Sorry, I just got to drink some water. One way to look at it is it's being very indecisive. The other way to look at it, I think, is, sorry, I should have switched cameras. You know, the other way to look at it is you've got room for ideas, right? You have room to be creative, right? It means that you can be a little bit more flexible. It means that there's a discovery process that's going on. It means that whatever it is that you come up with at the end, it won't be the exact vision you had in mind, but there's still like, you still have the capability to surprise yourself. It means that whatever it is that you end up with, it's going to be, wow, I never even saw that coming, right? Like if you already know exactly how something is going to turn out right up, you know, from the very start, if you have like this, let's say you had some god tier imagination and you had a very finalized version of the drawing in your head, and you just have to, draw it and make it happen. It means that, oh great, now you get to skip all this pre-visualization. And it just really becomes work at that point. It becomes work because you've already got the image in your head, right? You don't have to. Whereas I find that in this case, like I like a more stumbling process. I like to figure things out as I go along. I kind of like the fact that I don't have a great idea at the very beginning, and that I kind of have to I have to get my ideas on the paper, and I have to throw some of these out. I have to go through a process of building up ideas and then rejecting them and throwing them out. It's a much longer procedure. But at the same time, I'm like, I just enjoy the process more. And the thing is, if I were to use a 3D model, well, number one, the 3D model, I'd just be tracing the 3D model, and I'd be using whatever proportions are provided with that 3D model, especially if it's like a stock 3D model, or like some people just download poses from like Poser and they apply those to the model. And I'm just like, man, you're missing out. You're really, really missing out on all these possibilities. Yeah, it's faster, but I just feel like you're shortchanging yourself, and you just become somebody who's not able to. Like I say, like there's a reason we call these like a lost art, right? Like I think that posing is fast becoming a lost art, and I feel like a lot of the anatomy in comics is getting very rigid, very like. They got really good anatomy, but the poses are rigid. Now I don't have yes, I know it like I sound like I'm dunking. It's very easy to interpret what I'm saying as oh, I'm dunking on mass produced comics, but let me just say one thing. It's like, okay, look, the nice thing about mass-produced comics is they give me something to read while I wait for the updates to the really good comics. So you know what? Thank goodness for mass-produced comics. Really, seriously, it's like. And here's another thing. It's like when we do the gesture. This is probably another nice thing about the fact that I didn't have a clear picture in mind, that I didn't sit down and like work out the gesture completely, is because you're going to see the searching process, right? You're watching the searching process right now, not accelerated, not sped up or anything like that. Look at that, right? When I went and did that to his arm, this is a lot more like, it's so much different from this kind of, yeah, right? There's like, we can kind of have this very, very angular, yeah, kind of, right? This is very, I guess maybe it's like an Iron Man thing, right? It's like we're shooting the ray out. It's going. All right, this is very directed. The other one is a little bit looser. Right. So that's the other thing, is that there's like, when you're doing the gesture, the reason I say there's no anatomy, there's no perspective, is because you're really working out the action, right? The exertion, the way that the arm is really, doing its thing, whether it's like a hard, a thrusting action, whether it's a hurling, swinging, baseball pitch action. And this is where, I think it'd actually be good if you're going to do like a throwing motion. Then what I would highly suggest you do is you go on YouTube and you find some baseball footage, find some people pitching fastballs, get some of that stuff and start like frame by frame pose, start going frame by frame through the pitch to understand, what is the action of the pitch? How is the hand holding the ball? And because the thing is, these athletes, right, like baseball athletes, they found the optimal way to throw a ball, and at a target, right, as fast as they possibly freaking can. So this is something that I don't think I've ever seen, right? I don't think I've ever seen wizardry where they threw a magic missile or fireball in an athletic fashion. Like, athletes are human beings in peak performance. Okay, so just imagine that, right? If people actually went and started drawing magicians that were hurling fireballs like they were pitchers, baseball pitchers throwing fastballs. Like, that's some crazy shit. Like, the reason why John Wick made such a huge, like, why it had such a huge impact on people is that Keanu Reeves, that guy went and he trained in a lot of competitive shooting. Like, the guy does like the 3-gun, and like the IPSEC, that kind of thing. Like, the guy did competitive shooting to train, as part of his training. And it's like all the really cool reloads and stuff like that. Like, the fast ways in which he reloads a shotgun and like many of those things are things that you would see in IPSEC. You'd see in like the competitive shooting scene, right? So, like, again, competitive shooting, human beings in peak performance conditions, right? And it's something that occurs in reality. And well, the thing was that Hollywood for the longest time ignored this stuff, right? They would do things, in a vacuum. They're artists, Hollywood is populated by artists. Artists would not do any research. They would just do things in the most dramatic way they could envision. And they're just working in a vacuum. They're working out of their heads. But I'm saying that, there's something to be said for doing some research to see people who actually do this stuff and study these people in peak performance, study the best people who do this stuff and try to, analyze and understand what it is that they're doing. And then to, bring that into your artwork, bring that into your depictions. And I think that would be it'll be new. I'll tell you that, right? It'll be very, I won't necessarily say it's original, right? Because it's, you're using research, but I say it will definitely look different. And I think it will go a lot further than simply taking a 3D model and posing that, or using baked, using poses grabbed from like the storefront, from some storefront, or just downloaded poses. It's what can I say, right? Is that we're living in the age of shortcuts. Everybody wants to do everything faster and easier. They want to use a bunch of tools. They want to use some cheats. They're going to use some 3D software, and they're going to pre-pose the models. They're going to use some AI software, and they're going to throw out some prompts and have the thing, churn out some other artwork. And meanwhile, they actually have to give it the name of an artist to like prompt it and to emulate or imitate. And I'm just, well, I know that the art industry, I should say industries, societies, communities, these are all collections of people, and collections of people are they're vulnerable to prisoner's dilemmas. So a prisoner's dilemma is when, let's say you got two people, all right, two partners in crime, right, a couple of crooks. Or maybe they're not even crooks. They went and they performed an activity that was illegal, but not necessarily immoral. All right. And so these two, suspects, the interrogator basically separates them into two different interrogation cells, and he offers them both the same deal. One is they got a number of options. They can either keep their fucking mouths shut. If they both keep their traps shut, then they won't have enough evidence, and they'll have to let them both go. But if prisoner A rats out prisoner B, or if prisoner B rats out prisoner A, okay, so if you rat out the other guy, then you'll get a reduced sentence, right? You'll be found guilty, but you'll get a reduced sentence. And if the other guy rats you out and you keep your trap shut, you're going to get a worse sentence. If you both rat each other out, then I guess you're both getting a reduced sentence. In fact, we might even give, maybe you'll both get an even further reduced sentence. All right. So the thing is that you're offering a lot of incentives to play prisoner A against prisoner B, and in order to get the reduced sentence. But the thing is that if they were to both just shut the hell up, they would both get away free. That's what a prisoner's dilemma is. So imagine a prisoner's dilemma with not just two prisoners, but rather three prisoners, or four prisoners, or five prisoners, or six prisoners, or 10 prisoners. And basically, the more prisoners you add to the prisoner's dilemma, the more likely that one of them's going to just not, one of them's going to take the deal and screw all the others, even if they all shut their freaking traps. And so when we look at the art industry, where we have all of these shortcuts, using AI, using 3D models. Oh, well, I mean, other people are going to start using 3D models, and so they're going to pull ahead. Oh, other people are using AI. Oh, they're going to get an advantage over me, and they're going to pull ahead. And it's like, this is what I mean by like every industry or every society and every community we're all like groups of prisoners with prisoners' dilemmas, And I just say, hell with that, man. Hell with that. The only way that you're going to get out of that is if you choose not to be a part of those industries, choose not to be a part of those communities. You choose to be, to do something different and maybe to operate in a different space. Or you may have to create your own space, or you'll have to find people who are like you, like-minded prisoners who are trustworthy, who aren't going to use these methods, and create your own collective. And it will have to be limited, because obviously the more people you add, the more likely that, one of them's going to start, one of them's not going to be able to keep their trap shut. One of them's going to start taking the deal. And that's how it is. So, and I feel like the age of shortcuts has brought about a lot of nihilism, right? So the nihilism is a very powerful force. It's a very, it's like, why even bother drawing when, we can just, when everybody's going to just churn out some AI sludge, right? Why even bother doing this? Why even bother doing that? The reason like why nihilism exists is it's actually a very powerful survival mechanism, because everybody who doesn't have to live in society or I should say, all the animals who are not living in a society, who are not living in civilization, are trying to do one thing. They're all trying to save enough calories so they don't starve. So having nihilism and saying, when nihilism basically lets you say, what's the point? It's a mechanism that lets you save calories. It's like when you say, what's the point of that? I'll just, give up and do something else, right? It means that you're going to be productive in some other realm. And I feel like things like algorithms and all the shortcuts of these days, I think they've all rendered they've all made it so that things feel meaningless. I feel like a lot of the shortcuts, I think there's too many mechanisms for saving energy. There's so many of them in civilization. I'm not saying that saving energy is a bad thing. I'm not saying these mechanisms are necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just saying there's so many temptations to save energy that things are starting to feel a lot more and more useless, a lot more meaningless. It's starting to feel like useless, right? Yeah, it's starting to feel like that, and I think that maybe we need a little bit of anti-nihilism to go around, which is to start searching for the meaning in supposedly meaningless things. Because don't forget, art, right? Art is not the top of the Maslow hierarchy, right? It's not one of the lower levels of survival and sustenance and shelter of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's really more of a self-actualization need. And so it's actually not pointless, is not useless. And I think that if you keep fostering a nihilistic mindset, well, I mean, everything in life just starts to seem kind of meaningless, and I think if everything seems meaningless, then that's a really good reason to lose a lot of motivation and to do any of this stuff, to even go. Like there's meaning in doing things the right way. There's meaning in taking the trouble of doing things the right way. So I just I thought I wanted to really get that off my chest, because like I say, this gesture stuff, it is harder to do than doing stuff with like 3D models. And it takes more energy, and it's like it seems like people will say, "Oh, with the 3D model, I would have done, I would have been done a long time ago." And I'm like, "Yes, you would have been done a long time ago, but there's a cost. You don't know what that cost is that you're paying." And the thing is that the more you do things this way, doing things the right way, it actually gets easier. Like because you just get better at it. You get faster at it. I haven't been into drawing for a while. I've been programming all the time. So I'm super rusty. So we can either do the pointed type, we can kind of have this, maybe there's a kind of thing where this guy is materializing a ball, and maybe he has a need, like KNEAD, like need it, like a bunch. He's got to need the magical power, like some kind of dough, or like it's like he's crafting a snowball. And again, right, like there's no perspective in this, right? I'm not. And the thing is that he could be looking at the fireball. He can be over here, right? So again, this allows, right? This is coming up with kind of a generalized silhouette, figuring out how is this action being. We're defining the action. We're trying to figure out how does that how does the body posing work? What's the body language that we're going to use when we're crafting this fireball? So let's put that aside for a bit. So the thing is, if you want to get really good at gestures, I got a number of exercises. And the exercises are not like, let's do this thing and get it out of the way. What the exercises are is, if you get really good at the exercise, then when it comes time for you to make your own comic book series or do your storyboards or whatever, you'll be like, oh, this is just doing the exercise. Like it's something that is directly applicable. It means that this is like, it's like storyboard practice, but it's like if you can do this, then you'll be ready for doing your storyboards. So I guess first one, I'm gonna just call it cell phone gestures. Cell phone gestures. So cell phone gestures involves taking a cell phone, right? Like you have your character, you give them a cell phone, and well, like I guess in this case, your character can be, maybe this character is like texting, right? So they can be texting on a cell phone, except they're really holding that cell phone pretty far away from themselves in this case, right? So when you look at that and you're like, oh, they're holding a cell phone pretty far from themselves. Well, maybe we can change things, right? Maybe they're on their bed, right? And again, you can throw away perspective at this point, right? So if they're on their bed, then maybe they've got like a pillow here, and they're burp. Yeah, so their head's kind of like like that maybe, and they've got their cell phone over here. So maybe I have to move that pillow back, or right. So that's the other thing, right? Like there's a lot of this working out of the physics of the pose. No autosave, leave me alone. And maybe I can adjust the head a little bit, right? Like it's open to adjustments. And maybe they won't be stretching their arms out so much. Maybe I'll just knock that back. But knocking things back means, that's starting to get a little cluttered. You've been making a lot of mistakes. You can just knock it back with a big fluffy eraser. And yeah, so I'm going to move their elbows out to here. Right. So that good, right? Like this helps. So we've got the pose a little bit better there. I'm trying to think exactly where I want to put that pillow. Right. And the other important thing about the gesture is, you know, when you look at it, you got to have some kind of sense for, like, it's got to be clear, like the narrative focus, the narrative focus, or the what is happening should be pretty obvious. And it's like, that's the thing that matters most, not the perspective, not the anatomy, not like how correct the drawing is, but whether or not you can really understand what's going on, right? Whether or not it's easy to understand what's going on. The correctness whenever you're doing a gesture is not important, and the speed is not important either. You don't have to be rushing this. What I would say is you take as much time as you have to, but the detail is not important. And it's not that you shouldn't be taking a lot of time to draw these. It's just that you shouldn't be over-investing in detail. You shouldn't be over-investing in correctness because it's a throwaway drawing. Like, you're not going to be keeping this drawing. And again, the proportions are wildly out of proportion, but who cares, right? Like, it won't see the light of day. And again, it's the kind of thing where you can, if the proportions bother you that much, well, then you can make corrections, right? And, you know, same thing with like the head and the face. Like, maybe you want to move it around, right? So cell phone poses are good. Here, we can do this from a slightly do it from a front angle. I've moved their shoulders up, like practically up where their ears are. And maybe we don't even have to really see. I can draw like the heel of their foot. We can draw the pillow. Right. So, you know, try a variety of cell phone poses. And the thing is, just keep redrawing and trying to work out, right? Try and figure out what is the correct posture, what feels comfortable, what looks, you know, as non-awkward, you know, whatever feels natural. Try to work on the pose until it feels natural, right? Like, this is a problem solving thing. You just need the experience. You need experience. Like, that's what the exercise is for. The exercise is just there to strip away all the other distractions, all the other stuff that is irrelevant to drawing gesture, to strip away all the stuff that is irrelevant to making a narrative storyboard image. And it just gets you right into the meat of the vital skill that you need to work on, which is getting these poses to read properly and to get it to feel natural, and to, once it's feeling natural, right, then you won't be distracted by this feeling of awkwardness. So the cell phone poses one is like the easiest one I would recommend getting into. So cell phone poses, right? Then what else is good? Passive gestures. So the thing about cell phones is cell phones have the cell phone offers a target, right? You've got a specific target. You have a thing that you can, like, if a person's taking a selfie, right? Like, that cell phone right? They're taking a selfie of themselves. There's this kind of an easy hieroglyphics that you can get in there. You always have that very simple target. You always have some sort of participant, which is, things happening to things. And then when it comes to like a passive gesture, passive gestures are a lot harder. This is where like, someone might simply be sitting down, right? It's passive. We might not have a specific target. So, a person might simply be sitting down. They might even be sleeping, right? So these are tricky ones. And these are ones where it's like, well, I guess maybe this person, I'm going to have them resting their elbows on their knees, and they'll just put their head, will rest their hands on their face, and I'll just bridge those two. Boom, boom. And then I can bridge that. Put their shoulder up here. Bridge that. And then I can and again, it's like, don't worry so much about drawing individual fingers, drawing individual toes, right? Like you can literally just draw feet as like duck feet. Like that's literally good enough. If you're drawing individual toes and stuff, it's a distraction, right? Like you're just going to be sitting there getting all caught up trying to draw the little teeny details that aren't important. Like unless somebody is actually using a finger to push a button, you don't really have to draw that finger, right? Because if the finger's pushing a button, or somebody's like flipping the bird, or something like that becomes a participant. Then you draw it. So I guess in the case of like a passive pose, I guess like even then you might still have somebody who's got some pockets in their hands. Their hands go into their pockets. Right. So workout poses like these, or gestures like these, and then also don't stop there, right? Like when you get a good gesture, after you've spent some time, adjusting the gesture and trying to get the pose to look, not awkward, and you keep redrawing the pose until it really looks pretty good. Then try turning it into an illustration, right? Because the thing is that we still need to work at the gradient of detail where eventually the thing does become an illustration. And I say, draw at least a rough illustration. So that way, because what happens is some people will only practice gestures and they just always stop right at the gestures. And when it comes time to do like an illustration, they find, I can only do gestures. I'm like, okay, that's because you don't have any experience taking the gesture to its final conclusion. So I say, do get good at making gestures, do get good at changing them and adjusting them, and getting to the point where you do compositional gestures and they appear to be in a good perspective. But then also do spend some time, cleaning them up and then eventually turning them into a finished illustration, right? Like get used to the whole process. Don't just stop at a rough drawing. Otherwise, you just get used to stopping at a rough gesture. Right. So there's the cell phone gestures. There's the passive gestures. I want to show you one more. I'm going to call this a reactive multi-comp. So a reactive multi-comp is a reactive multi-composition. So reactive multi-comp means like the Last Supper is a really good example of a reactive multi-comp. But like if you have somebody who is, doing a thing, right? So maybe this person is here. You know what? Let's go with the cell phone thing, right? So let's say this person is going to do that selfie thing, right? Boom. Going to take a picture of himself. And maybe he's got his other hand. I don't know. He's like brushing your hair back or something. Let's get that shoulder there. Okay, so taking a selfie. Then you can have another person who is going to react to the first person. They're going to photobomb. So you have another person who's photobombing. And then you have another person who's also photobombing. And in this case, I'm going to have them sticking their finger, pull back their mouth to make a funny face. So again, this is where I say, right, the only reason I drew that finger is because it's a participant. And then we can have passersby. Who are reacting. Right? That's why I call this a reactive multi-comp. So maybe this person, I haven't figured out what they'll do with their arms yet, but I'm just gonna, oh, okay, you know what? We worked out the pockets thing. Let's put their hands in their pockets. I'm purposely gonna stick their shoulders up high. So they look very hunched now. And maybe I'll have him seated, right? So I'm just thinking, where will he be seated? I don't know. Right. So again, this is great because what it does is like this is like the approach of quantity versus quality, right? Is that you're going to do a large quantity of gestures and you're working them into a larger picture, right? So we don't have this constant startup cost. The startup cost is where it's like, well, I got to come up with an idea and then I got to like draw the frame and then I got to like, do it's like every single one is coming up with a new idea, coming with a new idea. In this case, this is just like, let's make a big thing with many people. And each time I'm just trying to incrementally add something to it. We don't have to keep paying the startup cost. And then I guess I'll have, maybe it's a bench of some kind. And there's somebody else who's like sitting on this bench. And they're mucking around their cell phone. This is the other thing, right? It's like no shortage of people in this day and age mucking around their cell phones. So it looks pretty natural. We've all seen people doing this so much. So there's no shortage of lived experience with cell phones. This is like maybe there's another person who's also sitting beside them, picking around on their cell phones. Right. That's what a a reactive multi-comp is that you're just trying to find ways to keep adding and adding and adding and adding and adding, and you're just filling the whole thing with people. And other, just basically a whole bunch of people all like photobombing this same person. This other passersby is like, oh, who are these weirdos, right? Have them spread out kind of in a kneeling position. Right. So that's why I say it's like this stuff's really the great thing about doing reactive multi-comp is that it teaches you to handle like interaction between multiple figures. You need to do fight scenes and people punching each other and getting grabbed and thrown, and so like there's a lot of this interlacing, a lot of intricate stuff that's going on, and so this gets you used to that. And it starts getting you thinking about interaction. So yeah, anyway, that's about it.